All right, Tara, we're ready to get started whenever you are.
Great, thank you so much. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the CITL webinar. Today, we are really lucky to have Dr. Stephanie Craig and Ann Kaufman joining us. They're going to talk about UDL implementation in teacher prep programs. Just to give everyone a little bit of background, please feel free to type questions into the chat, and we also have the transcript enabled, so you have access to that as well. I'm going to just take a quick second and introduce Stephanie and Ann, and then I will turn it over to them. So Dr. Craig is an assistant professor at Marietta College. She taught in grades 3 through 6 over the course of 9 years in Columbus, Indiana. She then coached teachers in the district in the implementation of universal design for learning for 5 years. And her area of research is professional development and the implementation of UDL in K-12 and higher education teacher preparation. And then Ann Kaufman has been teaching at Marietta College for the last 5 years and teaches the course on diverse learners to middle school teacher candidates. Prior to joining Marietta, she taught middle school special education for 8 years in West Virginia. So I will pass it over to you, Dr. Craig.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here. I know we actually put this off a couple months. It's nice to have my voice back, even though it took most of the summer. But yeah, we wanted to talk to everybody about what we're doing at Marietta College. It's a small private college, liberal arts college in the southeast region of Ohio. It's interesting. I always add this in because I think it's sort of cool that Marietta City, that was like the first settlement in the Northwest Territory. And that's all I know about. Anne could probably tell you more, but so we're right on the river. But yeah, I started 2 years ago. I'm going into my 3rd year, and we just really wanted to start threading UDL and that mindset through the program. So first of all, our philosophy, which this is one reason I came to Marietta, is that we're really trying to shoot for the development of inclusive educators. And we'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about our dual programs, which sort of aligns with that philosophy. We know that one size does not fit all. And we also have that belief that neurodiversity is the norm. So, you know, in our classes, we talk a lot about language, how it changes, and then just how personal it can be. And so while we do believe in that inclusive environment, we do know that the reality out there is that even at best, sometimes inclusive classroom students are in there only 80% of the day, which I say only, that's a big hunk of the day. But there are also the realities of pullouts, and I'm going to let Ann speak to that.
Right. So with our programs that are currently dual, or at least 2 of our programs at Marietta are preparing students to teach general education and special education. And I think we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. We've felt it important to try not to keep things that we do separate. For example, we have classes for general education and we have classes for special education. So we're continually working to integrate those 2 and not keep them separate as we have these dual programs. So that's where we're working toward going, is educating all students. So, and in doing so, we want our courses to be designed to educate all students and not keep those gen ed, special ed courses separate. So that's where we're working, and Stephanie and I have worked very closely together to try to redesign some of the courses so that we can do what we preach. I guess we want to practice what we preach. So that's where we're moving toward, and UDL is really the avenue in which we're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, Ann and I, we co-taught last fall together. Did we co-teach last semester? I don't think we did.
Not last semester.
But that's another thing, is that we know that co-teaching, there's a lot of research behind it and how beneficial it is. So we not only want to prepare our candidates for co-teaching, but we also want to model it as well. So that's where we are with the program right now. So Ohio is a state that really is moving everyone towards, at least higher ed, into these dual programs. So we have currently 2 that are in place. The first one is the SEED program, and that's special education, early elementary dual. And this next spring will be our 3rd cohort graduating with a dual license in special ed. And that actually should be K-12 for special ed, because they haven't grade banded it yet. And I'm not sure if that's going to happen for this group or not. But anyway.
I'm not really sure either. We've talked about it, about grade banding those areas of special education, but the problem that we've run into is that the assessment that educators take at the end of their year, their licensure program, assessments are not grade banded. So we want to prepare them to be able to do well on that test. So until we can align the OAEs, which is the Ohio assessment for educators, I'm not sure when we'll be able to do the grade banding.
Sure. Thank you for that clarification. And then mixed ed, I'll let Ann talk to that specific program.
Right. So this is, our second cohort will be graduating in next fall, and very similar to the SEED program. It's a dual program as well. So students don't have the option to take coursework in just general ed or just special ed. The curriculum is designed for students to be prepared to teach in either area. But this is a program for students who are interested in middle childhood grades 4 through 9. So that's the mixed ed, middle childhood special education dual is what mixed ed stands for. With the second group graduating next year, I think I said next fall, but next spring, we anticipate the same number of students to be able to get jobs likely before their student teaching semester ends, which is what happened this past spring. So it's a very popular program. The students will have their license in special education K-12, but then they'll also have the general education license in either science and math, which would be the STEM track, or English and social studies, the humanities track. So they choose which content track they want to go with, but the special education portion is the same for both of those areas. So that's the middle childhood program.
And then we have the high school dual. That's not yet started, right? It's at the pending approval at the state.
Right.
Right?
That's exactly right. The high school program, we started with the planning of that program right as COVID hit, and it put a lot of kinks into our into our progression. So we're a little behind with that. But what that program will look like on the general education side, students will still major in their content area. So for example, if a student wants to teach high school history, they'll actually major in history and complete all the pedagogy courses that are required. But then they can have, this one is one that students will have a choice. And they can choose to add on the special education minor, which if they do choose to go that route, then they would be dually certified as well. So the AYA program is the only one that actually has students making a choice whether they want to add that special education minor. And from the students that I've talked to, I think most of them would want to do that. The problem then becomes with secondary, with the number of hours that are required. And it becomes a pretty big program to get all of those courses in. But we have a lot of students who enter our programs who have already completed college coursework in their high schools. So they're able to, we think students will be able to add that minor without any major problems. So that's where we are. And that one is just about, I think it's going through the state right now for approval. And then hopefully we'll be able to roll that out really soon.
Thank you, Ann. A colleague and I wrote a grant for a new program that this is the second year of the grant. So it is really under development, but it's for an inclusive wellness program. So students that would go through this program would be dual licensed, P12 in physical education, and then K12 with special education. We're not even at the point where we've talked about if they would have a choice like AYA, but I think it's truly going to be a dual program. So that's where we are, and that's where we're moving towards. I believe, and Ann, you can correct me, we usually have 100% placement with all of our graduates. And I know a lot of the graduates that came out this last couple years that I've been, most of them have been in intervention specialist positions. So, we're trying to really make our students, just by the nature of how they've been trained through our program, to be more inclusive. So moving on to how are we trying to thread UDL through the program? As freshmen, students come in, and if they are a declared major in education, they take our education seminar class, and it's a 1 credit hour class. It's the first class that they'll have field experience. They have 30 hours out in the field, and which is really beneficial because from day one, when they start college, they get a taste of what it's like out in the classroom rather than go through all these courses and then their junior year, oh, this isn't what I expected. So that's a class that UDL is introduced in. We have a lot of great conversations about equity and accessibility. And then diverse learners, that's one that Ann teaches. So I'll let her speak to that a little bit.
Right now, did you say? Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. Right, diverse learners is that intro to special education class where students are learning about IDEA, what the law says, how students qualify for special education, what an IEP looks like. We go through some legislation that has happened, talk about the different categories under IDEA. So it's really specific to special education. But in the beginning of the course, I do introduce, or it's really not introduced because students have had that education seminar at the point that they have this course. I do talk about UDL, and they do have a background. And it's really interesting, since Stephanie has joined us, the students that I have coming through diverse learners already know about UDL and what it is. In the past, before she was here, they didn't. I was introducing it. And so it's really nice that students start out understanding, at least with a basic understanding of what this is, what UDL is. And then as we move through the course, I talk about and continue to go back to what does the law say? What are we required to do? But then with that understanding that students already have, they begin to see, well, what the law requires us to do if we just do this for everyone, isn't this UDL? And I'm like, yes, it is. If you know, you're following the framework, you're looking at choices, you're providing options for everyone. And so I'm continually reworking diverse learners in my mind to get that even more in play. So that's where, that's where that is. So it's like I said, it's designed specifically for special education and following the law and somewhat the reality of special education. But with the students' current background, they're able to see how those can sometimes be interwoven.
Before we move on, there was a question from Lynn. Thank you for being here, Lynn. Oh, am I not supposed to answer that right now?
Yes.
No, go ahead. and
Oh,
answer.
okay. There's something popped up. I'm like, "Mm." Okay, so Lynn wanted to know how long each of these programs take. And that's one thing that's really difficult about this, is that we want it to stay within 4 years. So the special education license is actually with, and I'm going to let, you'll have the language for this, but it's mild, moderate, correct?
Right. Yes, it is.
So there's not, they do have some field work that goes out into classrooms that do have students with moderate to severe or significant needs. So we try to stay within 4. We have had some people that try to go through 3 because they're bringing all of these college credit classes with them when they come in, or they're transferring from another college. And it's tricky because, you know, there's obviously a route you want to take, and certain things have to be taken before others and so forth. So, yeah, I don't know if Anne, you want to say any more to that question, but we really do try to stay to 4 years. It's
designed to be completed in 4 years. One of the things, and I'm not sure how things are done at other schools, but we in the education department start advising on day 1 when students are freshmen. So we have 4-year plans that are in place early on, so students know exactly what they have to take each semester, and it's laid out. We have it is doable in 4 years, especially seed and the middle childhood. That's why we were a little bit stuck with the secondary minor in special ed, because of the credit hours and being able to finish in 4 years. But I do think that the fact that we're advising from day 1 as freshmen, as students come in as freshmen, we do have a lot of students that do come in with college credit plus, or have transferred. As a matter of fact, I currently have met with an advisee last month who just graduated from high school, but came in with an associate's degree. She's already completed all of her general education requirements because she was able to as a high school student. And when that happens, of course, that's very easy. I will say, though, it's not all perfect, because what happens is with those 4-year plans, they're pretty tight and you can't shuffle too many things around. It also becomes a huge issue when a student doesn't do well in a course or 2 and they have to repeat it, because we have a GPA requirement. I have advisees that fall into that as well. So if students aren't making the grade and they have to retake classes, they may have to go a little bit longer or go into the summer. So because we do advise from the very beginning, we go over all of those things. I guess you could say that, you know, you really need to take these courses when we're suggesting you take them, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll change things around, and it does get ugly sometimes. But it is doable. But like I had said, and Stephanie had said as well, when students come in with at least a few college credit classes, it makes things a little bit easier, and the semester's not quite so tight. But it still is possible, because we have students who graduate with coming in with absolutely nothing. So It is tight though. It's not super easy.
With that all being said, you might see the next two things as new. How are you fitting that in? Well, we met in May. We had a couple days where the whole department met, and we just are constantly trying to change with the needs that we're seeing or that's being communicated to us through our students or from our students. So although we want, like in all classes that I teach, I'm always, sort of structuring everything around UDL. We talk about it. It's sort of one of those things that's always present in all my courses. But we also, and one thing that I'd love to get away from, is that UDL and special education they're not married in that only students with special needs, a teacher would use the UDL framework. It's good for everybody. So next spring, we're going to start a 1 credit hour class that will be an introduction, or maybe a little bit, since it's already introduced in 120 or the education seminar, that will go a little deeper and also bring in unit planning. And because that's something else we want our candidates to be prepared, how to create an interdisciplinary unit. And so then follow it up with, and these numbers I just made up because I don't know what the numbers are going to be, but a second class then would come maybe at the 200 level for the same students, that, and again, another 1 credit hour class that would go deeper into UDL and also deeper into unit planning. And then in their senior year, they would also have an even deeper understanding of UDL with because we have a year-long internship in the fall. They are out in the field so many days, and then they also have courses. So as far as our course, that's where we're moving towards. I'm really excited about the direction that we're going. So something that also I try to do is really provide a lot of resources and looking at our textbooks and articles and anything that we're using in class. So we just adopted this book, and I don't want to butcher the name of the author, but it's Teaching in Today's Inclusive Classrooms, a UDL Approach. This is one that it deals a lot with special education, but then it also brings in a lot of UDL examples and pieces. And even though I'm saying, well, we want to sort of separate those two, at the same time, we do want them to be able, our students, to be able to see the connection and be able to see examples and so forth. I also teach a transition class. One is for mixed ed, and then we just separated it so that the elementary has their own transition class. So their placement is actually out in inclusive pre-K classrooms. And so I found this book. It's awesome. It's got so many practical suggestions, and it's very clear. So students usually take transition. It's a 200 level class. Usually they're for sophomore or junior year. And then I have used Louis Lord Nelson's Design and Deliver. And then we also have Patty Ralabate's lesson planner book. Another thing I want to mention is that we want to be accessible to our students as well. And books cost a lot of money. So what we've done is, with grants that we've gotten through the Ohio Dean's Compact, we've actually purchased classroom sets of these textbooks so that students can check them out at the beginning of the semester. They don't have that cost. Now what was I going to say? Sorry. What I'm finding is that a lot of the students go ahead and purchase once they've gotten the book. A lot of times they'll come back and say, I want to turn this back in because I purchased my own copy, which is great because they're seeing the value of having that resource. And all of these resources that are on the screen, they're pretty recent publications. The 4th edition of the UDL approach. That is like, I think it's a 2023 is what it said. I don't know how that works, but and then the UDL in early childhood classrooms, that's like a 21 or 20. And I just think it's important if you have textbooks that they're up to date. Something else that I like to use is, and believe me, I do not get a kickback from Louis Lord Nelson. We're good friends, but I love her podcasts, UDL in 15. I think it's good practical information from teachers in the field for our students to listen to. And then another thing that I also use of hers, which I love and the students love, is it's a Go Fish game, but it's all about UDL and you're trying to get all the guidelines and so forth. So that's a fun way of, we all are trying to model the different strategies and ways that you can be teaching students, and it doesn't have to be a lecture. It doesn't have to be this or that. So again, I've used that every semester with a class at least once. Was there anything as far as resources or textbooks you wanted to add, Ann?
No, other than the UDL lesson planner that's on the far right side. I think that's the book that a lot of students have said, why didn't you tell us about this book sooner? Why didn't you, share this resource sooner? So no, that's one that students, I believe that's the one that students talk about being such a great resource. And then I've done various things. I'm not familiar myself with the Go Fishing with UDL, but incorporating various parts of the framework and things like that into games that I've played with my students as well. I'm working on one right now this summer. So yeah, I think we're hopefully seeing it all being blended into all the programs, or the classes, I should say, not the programs. Well, the programs too, but the classes.
Yeah, Amy, we'd be happy to share emails and so forth. I don't know why I didn't put a screen or I didn't make a slide, but I'll definitely share that with you guys. So moving on, couple other resources that we use. Goalbook is a really nice resource. There is a cost to it. However, universities can partner with Goalbook and you get a limited access subscription. So and we can have as many students on there as we want. So I rotate, like our graduates, I take off. This is a resource I'd like to get started with students earlier because it shows a lot of the research. And if you haven't looked at Goalbook, it's a really interesting resource. So that's one that we use. Learning Design offers micro credential in UDL. And in the past, we have purchased so many seats or so many, I don't know what you want to call them, but spaces where we can have our students go through the first level of the micro credentialing and get that. So those are just a couple things that we use. But I am more, and this comes from when I coached, I want to give people as many resources as they can have. And then they can choose which ones, I really like this one. And we do have people that are students that sort of gravitate to one thing or another. And I think that's just sort of being attentive to their needs. And again, giving them multiple ways to understand the framework and resources to give them so they can use it. So one thing that when I came on board at Marietta College, and then specifically through the grant that Dr. Ryder and I are on, one thing that we wanted to do was provide some professional development to the mentoring teachers that are out in our partnership schools. And Anne can probably attest to this, but with COVID being on the table, and then the year after COVID, or 2020 in the fall, they went back in person, but they were in cohorts, so not all the kids were in schools. It was just really a lot for teachers. And the first year, I don't think I even approached anybody about professional development. for fear of losing my head. But then the second year, I went out, really talked to a lot of administrators. And again, it's just, they've got so much on their plate. They're trying to deal with so many things. And so it's been next to impossible to get any type of professional development that is free to them for them to sign up for. And I think a lot of it has to do with just everything that they're dealing with, and with the residual things that happened through COVID. And anyway, I think anybody in education probably understands what I'm trying to say here. But one thing that I want to start this next semester or this next year, are some lunch and learns. So they would be, I'm going to think quarterly to begin with. It's still in the works, and doing these for our faculty. And in the past, I believe, because they haven't had any since I was here, but I think, and they were open to students in the past. Is that correct?
Yes, if you're talking about what I believe you are, the I don't remember, pizza and pedagogy. The pizza and pedagogy lunches were mainly for students. I think that faculty at the college, they were invited, but I don't recall ever having anybody attend other than our students. So maybe opening it up and publicizing it a little bit more. But yes, students are always invited.
And another thing, and because I feel like our department, we, like I said before at the very beginning, we have this philosophy, but some of us are newer to UDL. I think Anne, when I came in, she probably was the leader in as far as knowing and understanding it a little deeper. So that's something that I also want to do, is support my colleagues in the department. We have a new person coming on board, which is really exciting. And so I feel like that's part of my responsibility too, is to make sure that I'm supporting my colleagues in any way that I can. Another thing that I'm trying to put together are some training videos, and that comes from part of the PICT grant, which was for the AYA dual program. Just putting together little snippets, bite-sized PD, and have it available for our teachers that are in a partnership schools, so that they can get some really practical ideas of what to do. So for this first series, which I don't have all the way done, but I actually interviewed some middle school and high school teachers in the district in where I'm from, Columbus, Indiana, that they've been using the framework for years, and they're very experienced with it. And so having that experience at my fingertips, I wanted to take advantage of it. So, those are a couple things we've got in place. I'm hoping that eventually down the road, we will have more teachers, more administrators that are open. I know when I coached and did a lot of professional development with staff, I would always hear people say, well, Stephanie, I just can't take one more thing on my plate. And I'm like, well, UDL is your plate. Okay. So I think a lot of times that helped some people. And then other people were like, no, I still don't want to do it. So that's where we are with how we're trying to, and if you have any questions as far as more specifically how we're trying to get these, the framework really worked into the program here at Marietta College. And was there anything else you wanted to touch on?
No, I think that you did a very good job there.
Thank you.
So I have a quick question, Stephanie, and I noticed what you had mentioned a little bit ago about that students understanding that UDL is not just a special ed thing, and that it really benefits general education as well. I'm wondering how, and maybe it's in Anne's class with diverse learners is how you help them understand that must have for students with disabilities versus the nice to have for students who are in the general education setting.
Right. So in diverse learners, we talk about what you have to do as a special education teacher and a gen ed teacher with regard specifically for accommodations and modifications, for example, because students seem to get hung up on those two things. So very explicitly, we talk about and look at various IEPs, and we look at those accommodations and modifications, and we talk about each one of them. For example, maybe a student is allowed to use a colored reading strip when they're reading, or maybe they have read aloud on tests or whatever. So we talk about that specific accommodation and why that student might need that and how they're benefiting from it. And then I'll question, well, let's say you have a student with a very similar struggle, but hasn't qualified for special education. And hopefully in your mind, you're thinking, you know what? Sally uses this yellow reading strip. I wonder if Jimmy might benefit from that too. So we talk about those things. And then they'll say, well, can we do that? And that's where I get cold chills and probably make a fool of myself and dance around and say, yes, you can. It's your classroom and you are there to teach your students, however they learn. And then someone, again, I get cold chills, isn't that a UDL? And I'm like, yes, Dr. Craig would be so happy. I mean, I very animated, and then a student will say, and I literally had this happen, well, there's a font for students with dyslexia that's supposed to be really good and helpful for students with dyslexia. Can that be an accommodation? Of course that can be an accommodation. And if it's written on the IEP, teachers have to do it. But then I'll question, well, what if you just presented that to everybody? Or what if you asked your students, do you like this font or do you like that font? Can we do that? Yes. So I try to bring in some excitement when students make those connections. But one of the things that we're going to work on for the fall is the reality of special education, which I've done. Because what we teach students about the framework and give examples and talk about barriers. And then they get into the classroom, usually their first year, their first job, and they're not seeing some of those things that we've talked about. Because the reality is a lot of schools still teach math in a special education pullout setting. Some schools still have a resource teacher that pulls out these students to work with them on specific skills. And so I want to focus a little bit more time on the reality, because I think it's important to be real. But I also want to put a component in of, okay, this is what you're probably going to see, but how can you be an agent of change for what might be a little bit better? And just being real about students, and maybe even going so far as, okay, how might you approach this with an administrator or a teacher that you're working with, and not come in and look like you know everything? Because we're, as teachers, we don't always like to get our feet stepped on, or some young person coming in and telling us we should be doing this. So, how are we communicating with our colleagues? And I'm really excited about that next phase, because I think I like a utopia, I call, and then we have reality, but then how can we make those components of that utopia actually come alive? So that's what I really want to work on for the fall. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Well, and one thing I want to add to that is that I know in my experience, I've had students come back. They're in their actual placement for their internship in the fall. and they've come back and they've said, you know, Dr. Craig, I tried to do this with the whole class and offer this to the whole class. And the teacher told me that that's illegal because it's only for the student with the IEP that has that accommodation. And the instance was they were doing, it was a 5th grade class, and they were doing some, I'm going to say long division. So one student had as an accommodation that they could use a multiplication chart. And our student wanted to just make it available for anybody who needed it, because that's not what they were really learning at the time. That wasn't the goal of the lesson. And for her, when I just cringed when she said, oh no, I was told by the intervention specialist teacher, that's against the law. And I'm like, no, it's not. But I love how our students, and I always tell them, you have to be discerning consumers of information. It's perfectly fine to question things if you think we don't want them to going out and being rude to their mentor teachers, and they're not. But they do come back and have that opportunity to talk, and we discuss, and what could that look like? So and I love that piece of it too, that we can also dispel those myths of education that, you know, I'm personally trying to tackle the learning styles with the students. And some of them get really angry with me, you know, when I talk about, well, it's not really such a thing, you know, they're more preferences. And anyway, it's nice that we're able to have those conversations about what they're seeing, and like Anne said, those connections that they're making. It's really exciting.
It's nice they bring those questions back to you.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I saw a few more questions come in the chat. Lynn asked, how do you intertwine for the least restrictive environment? And then she asked about the year-long internship, but 2 separate topics, I think. So,
well, I can talk just a minute about the least restrictive environment. We in diverse learners and other courses, again, talk about what IDEA says and define it, and then what does that look like. But the nice thing about diverse learners is that the students have a field component with that as well. So all of them are in a field of some capacity. We'd like for them to all be paired with an intervention specialist, but that's not always possible, because sometimes I have 25 or 26 students and we don't have that many intervention specialists at our disposal. So sometimes they're paired with a gen ed teacher who might have a co-teaching period at the time that they're out there. So one is just kind of, again, direct instruction on what is least restrictive environment, what are some placement options, and then they talk about what are they seeing in field. And then I often question, number one, is this the least restrictive environment? What if it's not, if they believe that maybe the student can receive the services that are listed on the IEP within the classroom, how might that look a little bit different? And sometimes they're with intervention specialists who are co-teaching or doing inclusion, not a whole lot are really co-teaching like Stephanie and I would really like to see, but maybe they are. We also have a separate school for, it's one of the few, I think, that's still left in Ohio. It's a separate school in Washington County for students with more severe disabilities. And so we talk about Ewing school as being a separate school. So that's very restrictive. So we have that to be able to make that comparison. And that's kind of bled throughout some of the other courses as well. But again, that diverse learners is where it's discussed, introduced, talked about. They look at it from their field perspective, and then make suggestions as to how that student might be able to receive their services in a different way, in a different setting, but still receive the services that are needed. I forget the other part of that question, but I think it was more geared towards Stephanie.
It was just asking more about the year-long internships.
Oh,
Thanks.
So when they go into their senior year, they start off and it's gotten a little bit weird in the last year because the schools, we're using more schools that our interns are being assigned to. So they generally come back to campus before classes start for Marietta College, but that's when their actual school placement is starting. So they are there day one. On the teacher day, any professional development the teacher does, they're right alongside them. And what we've done in the past, and I've been there so long, but what they've done the last 2 years in the fall is they're in class Monday and Friday, and then Wednesday, they're out in their schools all day. A lot of the feedback that we've gotten from graduating seniors has been, and even teachers has been, we want them in the classroom so much more in that fall semester, because in the spring, they then start full-time in the classroom. They've already built up those relationships and kids know them, they know their routines and so forth. We're trying something different this semester and I'm excited about it, but the first 2 to 3 weeks when our students start, and I'm talking about the seniors, they will be in the classroom on all day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then they'll come back. I think the first component that comes back for courses to do the coursework starts September 7th, and it's for like 3 weeks. They are not out in field at all, but on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they are with us on campus in class. And then the next rotation, they're out 2 to 3 weeks in the classrooms full time, those 3 days. And then we are having them the last 2 weeks of the semester, they'll be out in their field assignments Monday through Friday, because one of their assignments for the semester in multiple classes is to create a unit. So we want them to teach that unit. What we found with the 1 day a week was it was a little, I don't know the right word, disjointed, I guess, because they only would see the kiddos 1 day a week. It was hard for us to have them plan a unit and then try to get them to teach it when they're just going 1 day a week. So we're using the feedback that we're getting from our teachers as well as our students to and so we're trying this out. It may be a flop, but I'm excited about it because I think they'll get so much more experience seeing things before they start their spring internship, that they'll see things sort of from start to finish a little better, even though they're not out on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I don't know if Anne, you want to talk any more about that?
no, that's great. I mean, I like that we're looking at the feedback to see how we can make changes to make things better for everybody. And that unit planning thing, that is so true. We do this in other field courses too, is we ask them to write a unit, a learning segment, and then they have to teach it, but they're only there once or twice a week and it wasn't working. So I'm glad that we're changing some things around. Yeah.
I know, Lynn made a comment about co-teaching. One thing that we started last year was attempting or trying out a paired placement because we wanted to build in an opportunity for our candidates to co-teach. So the last graduating class, we had a pair at the elementary level and then a pair at the middle school level. And they weren't like attached at the hip every single day. They had specific times they could teach by themselves, but we tried to get them. I happened to be their college supervisor, and I would go out and I'd say, okay, this next week, I want you to try to incorporate a different model of coaching or co-teaching, sorry. And that was really nice. the feedback that I got from the students who were doing that placement and the teachers was incredible. They loved it because, you know, in the past, I've had teachers say, oh, I don't want to have all these people in my room. But I feel like if you plan well, it's going to be so much more beneficial to the kiddos in the room. So I think that that was a big piece, that they went in knowing what they needed to do. And so it also it helped with the collaboration with them, seeing one another teaching and a lot of the ideas they would come up with. And I wanted to give them more of a voice, because a lot of times our interns will go out in the classroom, not that we are wanting our interns to go out and just like, hey, we're changing everything, but to be able to feel like they do have some voice in that internship. So that's something that I'm sort of playing around with, and it's working out so far. But
Great.
again, UDL is always, you know, the first thing that I'm asking them to think about and look through those lenses. And the freshman class that I had this past spring in seminar class was incredible with the ways they were saying, you know, I was seeing this and that's not very accessible. And I was like, yes, you know, so it's just exciting to see those light bulbs go off with our students and going off earlier and earlier within the program.
That's great. When you were doing the pairs of teachers, were they going into classrooms where there were two teachers co-teaching also? Like
the elementary pair, yes. Actually, I love this team. It's at a local elementary, and they are just my ideal team, because the intervention specialist is co-teaching with the math teacher, and they're in pods. So one teacher has the language arts and then another has the math, and the intervention specialist is only at that grade. She's at that grade level. So she's working with that pod of teachers. So at times there were 4 adults in the classroom, but when I would go in and observe, it wasn't like anybody was just sitting off to the side, except for me, because I was observing, but everybody was being able to work with students and pop around to those that needed more help, or those that need a little bit more direction to stay on task and so forth. So yes, in that instance, we did. Unfortunately, that is not always the case. You don't always have a lot of co-teaching going on, which, you know, is sad. But we do then with our just the single candidates that are going into an internship, we do really encourage their mentor teacher and for the intern to plan for that co-teaching model, rather than, oh yeah, they're going to help if they see something that needs to be done. They're really sort of leading that. So short answer, too late, but short answer is yes, with the paired placement, we really tried to focus on that type of placement. Middle school is a little different because, and I don't know why, if it's just because they have periods and the students are moving from one subject. It was hard to have, I'm going to say it was hard to have integration. Like both of my students were humanities. So they were in language arts and then social studies. You know, I as a teacher, I always was integrating multiple topics and subjects together, but I don't know. And maybe Anne has more insight to this, but I think it may just be the way that middle school is set up, that it's a little bit harder to see the co-teaching, but I could be totally wrong.
I unfortunately did not get to observe those two in that paired placement, but having taught at that school in previous times, there's opportunities for co-teaching, but not everyone will do it. Unfortunately, there were intervention specialists at that school in the past who would say, I don't know math. I can't co-teach math. And so it didn't always happen. But I use that example in some of my other courses and say, okay, let's say you're a humanities person, but you're in an inclusion math class. So you need to do some co-teaching. And some of them will be, oh, I don't know anything about math. No, that may be the case, but you know how to teach vocabulary. You know how to help with comprehension and reading. So it doesn't always have to be about the content area. And then sometimes I'll say, you know what, you don't know a whole lot about math. You need to learn some. So, you don't know 6th grade math. Maybe you need to just get on Khan Academy and learn a little bit. So it happens. There's opportunities for that co-teaching to happen. It's just a personal thing sometimes with some teachers who just won't take that little extra step to do it. But like I said, we as in the courses, we talk about those. What can you do how can you maybe help this situation?
Great. Yeah, a lot of times it can depend on the teachers themselves and whether or not it works. I had one other question, I guess to both of you about least restrictive environment. And I'm just thinking back to when I was a resource teacher, and I was wondering if you get questions from the students or ever talk about when the general education setting sometimes isn't the least restrictive environment at times because they have a one-on-one aide with them all day long. So it's not allowing them to be as inclusive as it should be, or because of behaviors that are taking them out of the classroom. Just curious, because that question comes up and it's always a challenging one, especially when inclusion is really the gold standard for least restrictive environment.
One of the things that I do in diverse learners, and I think I probably should focus a little bit more time on it, but I do talk about, or we talk about as a class, what are the skills that students need to have to be successful in a gen ed classroom? So yes, it would be wonderful if every student could be in a gen ed classroom, but there are some skills that students need to have to be successful. And we go through those and talk about maybe some students that we're seeing in field that exhibit those behaviors or don't exhibit those behaviors. So in reality, on paper, it looks really nice that every student is in a gen ed classroom or having services in a gen ed classroom or having support, but I kind of just start with that. Well, what does the student need, or what do students need to be successful in this classroom? And for example, I use this example in science class. Sometimes if students are dissecting, they have sharp instruments. Well, are there any accommodations that might be able to be used if we have students with maybe some fine motor skill problems or anything like that? And so we kind of talk about specific examples. And then I had a student years ago who had narcolepsy and cataplexy, and sometimes he would just collapse, and I would share that story. And is that safe for him to be dissecting in such a way hands-on? What are some alternatives? Well, there are some virtual dissections. So we kind of just take it individual by individual, but like I said, we do go to those skills. What is success? What are those skills to be successful and safe, I should say, as well.
One example that I have there in the district I came from, they did have life skill classes. And one of the life skill teachers, he was really trying to implement UDL, and the kiddos that would be going to the classrooms, and this sort of speaks to the full-time aide, the aide would take the student to the classroom, but they wouldn't sit next to that student. They would be around the classroom helping other students. And two things happened. The students who were in the classroom started sort of including those students from the life skills class more, because they were put in a position where they were in a group and they needed to talk. And so I think it helps those students who don't have disabilities to be able to build those relationships, even if it's a short amount of time. But this teacher talked a lot about how he would, maybe a student would go to a class with another student up here, and then he would come in maybe 5 minutes later, and he would, again, wouldn't attach himself to that student. And I think that's a piece that needs to be talked about, as well as what are those skills? Because the social piece of a student being in a classroom 80% of the time is really important. And so that was something that he was trying to do with his students, was, and with the students that were neurotypical is, there's no need to be scared of this person. There's, they get to know each other, and then they can build those relationships so that it's not just they're in the room and it's just a physical thing. Because I've seen that, people park themselves in the back table and their aide is right next to them, and that's called inclusion. And that, I think we all know that isn't, but there's a lot of moving parts with that. But yeah, we do. I've had discussions with students about that. One thing that I think we're going to go more in depth with the IEP, especially the Ohio IEP, is that justification piece for the LRE. Is, if it isn't, I think that's a good piece to have students really thinking through, well, why is the gen ed classroom not the least restrictive? And I think that's a really good thing for our students to have to contemplate and really think about, because sometimes it's not a matter of it's more of an adult problem than it is a student problem. So
very, very good point. And looks like we're a little bit over time. So I just want to thank you guys both so much. This was fantastic. I saw that you shared your emails, or Mackenzie did for us. So please feel free to reach out to Stephanie and Ann with questions. And this was fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, don't hesitate to ask any questions. I get on a roll sometimes, and I can go on, but I can shorten things by typing too. So, but I love games. So someone had asked about various games, and I love games. So Stephanie, you have some great ideas too. So please let us know.
Thank you.
thank you. Thanks for having us. This was fun.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
this
you.
was great.